The mother or me? That was the exact ultimatum a minor girl gave to her adult boyfriend. She was 14, he was 30. She was a traumatized teenager who had gone through a series of foster homes and knew neither home nor love. He was an adult man who surely should have known the line between care and crime. But this story is not just about a toxic relationship. It is about how the absolute, all-consuming obsession of one person broke the last barriers in the soul of another. Kaitlin Coons was ready to do anything for Jonathan Jones. At some point, childhood infatuation proved insufficient. An enthusiastic attachment turned into a monstrous demand, an ultimatum that she delivered coldly and without hesitation, which would have shocked anyone. The girl gave her boyfriend 5 hours, just 5 hours, to prove his devotion. The price of that proof was unthinkable. He had to take the life of his own mother. Why did an adult man continue this communication at all? What forced a young girl to issue such a perverted ultimatum? And most importantly, what did Jonathan choose when the life of his mother was on one side of the scale and the madness of the girl he loved was on the other? Did he agree to this deal with the devil, or did he find the strength within himself to betray Kaitlin to save the one who gave him life? This is the story of Kaitlin Coons and Jonathan Jones. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more cases. This helps us a lot. Thank you. Kaitlin Coons was born on January 21st, 2006. The girl's childhood was not easy. Her biological parents, according to those around them, did not pay proper attention to the child's upbringing and often showed cruelty toward her. It is known that they inflicted serious psychological trauma on Kaitlin. Because of this, Child Protective Services took the girl away from the negligent parents and placed her in a foster family. Kaitlin's childhood years were spent in various places throughout Ohio, and it was there that the events of today's story unfolded. The girl often moved from one foster family to another, never staying long anywhere. Kaitlin suffered from emotional and psychological problems, often acting out, getting angry, and getting into conflicts with other children. Because of this, she was constantly rejected and handed over to new guardians. The constant moves from one temporary family to another only worsened the situation. Every new hallway smelling of someone else's life, the cautious or indifferent eyes of new parents, all of it seemed to remind her, "You are extra. You are not one of us. You are just a temporary problem that will soon have to be passed on." Kaitlin felt like an unwanted and unloved child. At the age of 12, her psychological state deteriorated and she began to self-harm. Physical pain seemed to be the only understandable, real feeling capable of momentarily muffling the unbearable despair in her soul. In parallel, another disorder emerged, an eating disorder. Food became for Kaitlin not a source of life, but a battlefield, a weapon, and a punishment. The schoolgirl's weight constantly changed. She would either lose weight sharply, turning into a fragile, almost transparent shadow, or, having lost control, quickly gain extra pounds and hate every inch of her body. At some point, Kaitlin simply stopped eating entirely. This was not a protest or a diet. It was a quiet, determined self-destruction. She silently pushed her plate away and made up excuses. For 5 days, her body, deprived of food, struggled, but then, due to weakness, Kaitlin simply could not get out of bed. The world blurred before her eyes, and her heart rate began to slow. She had to be urgently hospitalized. The hospital became another stop in the girl's life, but this time it was no longer about spiritual survival, but physical. The same problems arose again and again, and over time, they began to take a toll on the teenager's emotional state. Kaitlin suffered from depression and anxiety, which led to constant runaways from home. Her foster parents repeatedly reported her disappearance to the police. So the life of young Kaitlin Coons was always full of difficulties and trials. And then the teenage girl reached the age of 14. It was at this time that she met a man named Jonathan Jones. And it was after this acquaintance that everything changed. Jonathan Jones was 30 years old. He grew up in Toledo, Ohio. Jonathan had always been a quiet, modest young man with good manners. At 18, he joined the army and was deployed to Afghanistan. Later, he met a girl from Kansas. They got married and had 2 children. Serving in the army had a strong impact on Jones. During his time in Afghanistan, the young man saw the horrors of the post-war period, becoming not only a witness to violent events, but also a participant. The man suffered a serious head injury and struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder. When he was discharged from the army at age 22, almost nothing remained of the former Jonathan, the shy boy with a direct gaze and good manners whom everyone once knew. He became nervous, twitchy, and sometimes aggressive. The army, which he had once chosen to become more masculine, released him back as a completely different person. He was not just discharged, he was broken. His good-natured smile was replaced by a tense grimace, and a constant wariness settled in his eyes, as if Jonathan were eternally expecting a stab in the back. After returning home, which should have been a healing process, his entire life began to fall apart. He couldn't hold a job for long, constantly cycling through one position after another. A warehouse loader, where the crashing of boxes drove him crazy. A night watchman, where intrusive thoughts plagued him in the silence and loneliness. A delivery driver, where constant communication with different people was required. In every job, Jonathan was undermined by his irritability, sudden bouts of apathy, and inability to withstand the slightest pressure from management. Jones's relationship with his wife deteriorated. The marriage, already cracked during his service, did not survive. His wife, who initially tried to help and understand, eventually grew tired of his withdrawal, outbursts of unprovoked anger, and the nightmares that made the man scream in his sleep. Common topics dried up. The silence at the dinner table became more and more unbearable. Ultimately, the couple divorced quietly, with a sense of bitter relief. After the divorce, the connection with his own children became agonizing and painful for Jones. Jonathan felt like a stranger at their birthdays and didn't know what to talk about during short, court-regulated visits. He began to drift away, missing calls and finding excuses until he hit rock bottom. Depression overwhelmed the man completely. The world finally lost its colors. Food, taste, and the new day stopped holding any hope. A doctor prescribed medications that only dulled the sharpness of the pain, but did not heal the wound itself. Eventually, having exhausted all options and strength, Jonathan returned to Toledo, Ohio, the city of his childhood, and settled in his old room in his mother's house. He returned not as a son, but as a refugee who had surrendered his possessions. The walls of his childhood home became his last sanctuary, and his mother's gentle care gradually healed his emotional wounds. Shortly after his 30th birthday, Jonathan Jones met 14-year-old Kaitlin Coons, and from that moment, his whole life went downhill again. Kaitlin was living in a foster family, but due to health problems, she was in inpatient care. She was undergoing a course at the Emily program for eating disorders. The girl didn't like it at the hospital. According to her, the staff was too rude to her, so she ran away. On the street, Kaitlin accidentally bumped into Jonathan. They started talking and easily found a common language. Then, the 30-year-old man and the 14-year-old girl exchanged phone numbers and went their separate ways. It would have been clear to any rational person that nothing good would come of this acquaintance. But the adult man, without a second thought, took the teenager's number, disregarding the fact that he had just flirted with a schoolgirl in a public place. Jonathan was not at all concerned that they might be seen. After their first chance meeting on the street, Kaitlin and Jonathan continued to communicate by phone. Their relationship developed, and soon they began to consider themselves a couple. Jones treated Kaitlin like a little princess, took her to beautiful places, and gave her gifts. The girl, who had never felt desired or loved, had a ton of mental health problems, and was very vulnerable due to her age, liked this very much. Soon, she fell in love with Jonathan because he was the first to show her attention and sincere care. Kaitlin wanted to spend all her time with her boyfriend, literally begging him to meet as often as possible. Jonathan, an adult man, easily gave in to the persuasion. He would pick up the schoolgirl in the middle of the night from her foster home and take her to a motel room. It goes without saying what they did behind the closed doors of the room, and even if it was by mutual consent, by law, it was still considered the statutory rape of a minor. So, he and Kaitlin had been meeting at the motel for over a year. Kaitlin turned 15 and suddenly realized she no longer wanted these meetings, which she directly told her adult boyfriend. But Jonathan began to blackmail her and manipulate the girl emotionally. He threatened to kill himself if she left him. Kaitlin was just a teenager and believed everything Jonathan told her. She could not stop the communication, which had suddenly become unpleasant to her. The situation worsened when the man expressed a desire to photograph Kaitlin naked. He did this not so much for himself as for the opportunity to make easy money for indecent photos on the darknet. Thus, another crime was added to his list, and from there, everything only got worse. During their meetings at the motel, Jonathan began to show cruelty. He would painfully slap Kaitlin and force her to drink alcohol so she would lose control and become more vulnerable. Despite the girl's protests, the man did not stop. Their relationship had been going on for 2 years, and by the end of 2022, the situation reached a critical point. In October, Kaitlin ended up in a medical facility due to mental health problems. She was in state custody and undergoing a rehabilitation program. She was strictly forbidden from leaving her ward, but for Jonathan, that didn't matter. One night, Jones came and took Kaitlin to a motel. The medical staff, discovering the patient's disappearance, called 911. The police tracked the pair to one of the motels. The missing girl was in a state of severe alcohol intoxication. She was found stumbling near the hotel. Kaitlin gave officers a fictitious name and age to avoid punishment, but it didn't work, and Jonathan was arrested. During a search of his phone, numerous indecent images and videos of the minor Kaitlin Coons were found, as well as other intimate photos and videos. It soon turned out that the man was selling these photos and videos online for profit, so Jonathan was charged with several counts at once. After being released on bail, he went home to his mother. Naturally, Nicole, Jonathan's mother, was incredibly upset upon learning what her son was accused of. She couldn't understand how he had turned from a quiet, modest youth into a predator who got involved with a teenage girl and mocked her, corrupted her, and then distributed indecent materials on the internet. It was difficult for the woman to accept that her son had fallen into a serious moral crisis. Nicole Jones was in her early 50s. She was described as the kindest and sweetest person you could ever meet. Nicole Jones was born and raised in Toledo, Ohio. After graduating from university, she got a job as a nurse at the city hospital. Nicole loved spending time with her family, especially with her nieces and nephews. She enjoyed large family vacations, gardening, attending church, and cooking. At 50, Nicole enjoyed a quiet life, was a homebody, and spent a lot of time creating comfort in her home. She was proud of her home, where she lived with her adult son, Jonathan. His mother always supported him and helped him find peace of mind, especially after the divorce. In 2022, Nicole suddenly learned that her son had committed a crime against a minor. To say she was upset is an understatement. After this incident, the relationship between Nicole and her son deteriorated, and they had serious disagreements. Jonathan was charged with several different counts, including intimate contact with a minor, selling indecent photos and video materials, interference with child custody, and others. A few months later, he pleaded guilty. The sentence was set to be handed down in the spring of 2023. Until that time, Jones was required to wear a GPS ankle tracker and be under house arrest. Also, under the terms of the bail, he was forbidden from contacting Kaitlin. However, Jonathan, disregarding the prohibitions, continued to meet with the girl. Since he could no longer freely leave the yard, Kaitlin would come to his house herself and sneak into his room. When Nicole found out about this, she was shocked. Kaitlin Coons voiced two different versions. First, she said that Jonathan's mother, upon learning of her secret visits to the house, allowed the girl to stay overnight in her son's room a couple of times a week. According to the other version, as soon as Nicole found out that Jonathan and Kaitlin were continuing to meet, she kicked them both out of the house. This information is not confirmed, as the minor Kaitlin was not a reliable source. Most likely, the truth was somewhere in the middle. Perhaps Nicole forbade the girl from coming to the house, but she did not kick her son out. This continued for several months until February 2023, when Kaitlin was in a serious car accident. A month prior, she had celebrated her 17th birthday. Feeling adult enough, the girl got behind the wheel while under the influence of illegal substances. Her car went off the road, and she suffered a severe head injury. Kaitlin was hospitalized and placed in a medically induced coma. During treatment, she underwent major surgery, and recovery took a long time. But as soon as Kaitlin recovered, she returned to secret meetings with Jonathan despite the court order and house arrest. Nicole Jones had not approved of her son's communication with the teenage girl before, and now she began to voice her indignation openly. Kaitlin could think of nothing better than to turn her boyfriend against his mother. She told Jonathan that Nicole was the only person in the world preventing their relationship. Kaitlin did not care that her man was already under house arrest, awaiting sentencing for the corruption of a minor. The girl placed all the responsibility for the fact that they had to meet in secret on Jonathan's mother. She literally hated Nicole for allegedly interfering with their love and cloudless happiness. Worst of all, Kaitlin began telling Jonathan that Nicole behaved completely inappropriately with him, that her relationship with her son was abnormal, as if the woman not only showed excessive care for her son, but also tried to seduce him. The girl claimed that Nicole was obsessed with Jonathan and wanted a romantic connection between them. Because of this, according to Kaitlin, Nicole was preventing them from meeting. This was the most blatant lie imaginable. But unfortunately, Jonathan believed her. Kaitlin planted these insane thoughts in Jonathan's head until April 2023. At that time, the still minor girl was placed in a foster family again, but one day she ran away, jumping out of a window at night, headed straight to Jonathan and hid in his bedroom for 3 days. Nicole had no idea Kaitlin was in their house. During all these days and nights, Coons continued to instill in Jonathan that his mother was true evil and wanted to destroy their love. The girl complained that she was tired of this and dreamed of them being together forever. On the 3rd day, Kaitlin issued a sick and perverted ultimatum to her boyfriend. They could only be happy together if Jonathan sent his mother to the other world in the name of their love. Kaitlin gave her boyfriend only 5 hours to think, and all those 5 hours they argued over the ultimatum. Obviously, Jonathan didn't know how to act correctly. On one hand, the girl managed to convince him that his mother was indeed behaving inappropriately. On the other hand, the life of the woman who gave him life, raised him, and tried to give him the best was on the scale. The man was not ready to get rid of his mother, which very much upset his minor girlfriend. Meanwhile, poor Nicole was going about her normal business in her own home. She didn't even suspect that a brutal crime, a plot to kill her, was being planned in her son's room at that moment. When 5 hours had passed and Jonathan refused to act, a dissatisfied Kaitlin gave him another chance to make the right decision. But even after that, the man did not agree. And that was when the girl took matters into her own hands. On April 19th, 2023, Kaitlin Coons left the bedroom in her boyfriend's house and went into the garden. There, she found a heavy stone and went into the kitchen where the unsuspecting Nicole was taking food out of the refrigerator. She quietly crept up from behind and, raising the stone in the air, brought it down on the woman's head. Nicole instantly collapsed to the floor, and Kaitlin continued to strike again and again. Jonathan was in the living room at that moment, in the room next to the kitchen. He heard everything perfectly, yet he did absolutely nothing to intervene and stop the attack. Despite the fact that the man refused to take his mother's life with his own hands, he just watched as his girlfriend smashed Nicole's head with a stone. Perhaps Jonathan's mother still had some chance of survival, but Kaitlin was not going to back down. Tired of swinging the heavy stone, the girl dropped it and began to strangle Nicole with her hands. Unfortunately, the weakened 53-year-old woman could not resist. She was completely defenseless before the aggressive young girl. Nicole Jones's terrible death at the hands of 17-year-old Kaitlin Coons was completely senseless. It happened suddenly, without any reason. And what's even worse, the son Nicole loved more than anything in the world allowed it to happen. Jonathan did not intervene or stop his girlfriend. After the murder, Jonathan went outside and smoked a cigarette, simply not knowing what to do next. He completely disconnected from the stressful situation and stood there in a daze until Kaitlin approached him and assured him everything would be fine. Together, they developed a plan to avoid punishment for the crime. First, the couple went to a local store where they bought a tarp and trash bags. Their shopping trip was captured by surveillance cameras. Then, Jonathan and Kaitlin returned home, wrapped Nicole's body in plastic, and put it in the trunk of her own car. They drove the corpse to a nearby apartment complex and threw it into communal trash containers. Jonathan was still wearing the GPS ankle tracker, and all his movements were tracked. After disposing of the body, the pair returned to the house, went through Nicole's things, and took everything valuable: a gun, jewelry, a checkbook, and some documents. Then they went and withdrew all the money from her bank account. The lovers went on the run in Nicole's stolen car. Kaitlin, recording a video on her cell phone, held a gun and laughed wildly. To an outsider, it looked as if she were still on a high from the murder she committed. Jonathan remained silent, in shock from his own weakness. He cut the GPS tracker off his leg and threw it out the window. The pair headed for Mexico to cross the border and lie low. 2 weeks passed. By that time, no one had noticed that Nicole Jones had disappeared. The lovers reached the Mexican border and could have easily disappeared into another country. But Kaitlin suddenly did something that completely turned the case upside down. What she did made no sense. The girl, in an excited state, decided to inform one of her foster parents about the crime she committed. Perhaps she wanted to laugh in the faces of the people who had given her shelter and care, or she was simply under the influence of illegal substances. It is unknown why Kaitlin, who had almost crossed the Mexican border and could have escaped justice, decided to play games with her foster family. She likely felt her own impunity and wanted to brag to someone. Who knows what was going through her head at that moment? The worried foster parents knew about Kaitlin's relationship with Jonathan and the court order against him. Now they were worried the man might have kidnapped the girl because Jones had not shown up for his scheduled sentencing court date. He was still under house arrest. It had been only a few months since the man pleaded guilty to all charges against him regarding the minor Coons. The foster family contacted the sheriff's office and reported Kaitlin missing. On May 5th, 2023, 2 weeks after Nicole's death, police arrived at the Jones home. However, the house was empty. Neither Jonathan nor Kaitlin nor Nicole was there. The craziest thing was that detectives considered the minor girl the primary victim. They weren't as worried about Nicole's disappearance as they were about Kaitlin's. Police were sure Jonathan had kidnapped the schoolgirl. To bring her home safe and sound, Jones was put on an international wanted list. As soon as the fugitives' faces appeared on the news, the couple had to hide, and a brilliant idea visited Kaitlin's head. She tried to claim through social media that she was fine, that she wasn't on the run, and that she should be left alone rather than saved. The girl published a post saying she was in Ohio and would soon turn 18, so she didn't have to answer to anyone. Kaitlin wrote that she didn't know any Jonathan, that she was just enjoying life, and people shouldn't interfere. It seems she posted a few more times. After that, she began posting her old videos, pretending everything was great. Kaitlin failed to consider that the videos were dated, and now everyone understood she was lying. On May 8th, a day after the social media posts and 3 days after police visited the Jones home, Jonathan and Kaitlin were spotted at the Mexican border. According to the police report, they were driving a 2021 Buick Encore belonging to Nicole, and they had her social security card, ID, credit cards, and medical insurance card. During the interrogation, the man refused to say anything, but the girl, during a 2-hour interrogation, told all the details of her crime. She confessed to hitting Nicole several times in the head with a stone and then strangling her. Her boyfriend was sickened when he saw his mother's dead body. When Jonathan caught his breath, they cleaned the house with cleaning supplies, packed Nicole's body in trash bags and a tarp, and then took it to a trash container nearby. The schoolgirl mentioned that her boyfriend was so terrified that he couldn't even touch the corpse, and the girl had to throw Nicole's body into the container herself. After that, Jonathan removed the GPS tracker, and they went on the run. For most of the way, the man tried to come to his senses. He could not accept that his mother was dead. To try and organize his thoughts, Jonathan used weed. Because of this, they had problems when they tried to enter Mexico. What the 17-year-old girl told detectives was horrifying, not only for its brutality, but for its cold-blooded cynicism. The stone, the blow to the back, the strangulation, and then the routine disposal of the body and flight on stolen money, like in a cheap crime novel. The lovers tried to remove a person twice, first physically, and then by throwing the remains into a dump, literally turning them into waste. In her defense, Kaitlin told police that the woman had behaved inappropriately and showed anything but maternal feelings toward her son, flirting with him and wanting to seduce him. This was supposedly the reason for the killing. However, everything said was an absolute lie. The true reason was that at some point, Kaitlin became obsessed with Jonathan and wanted to remove all possible obstacles from her path. One of them turned out to be Nicole. After the confession, Jonathan Jones and Kaitlin Coons were arrested on charges of attacking 53-year-old Nicole Jones, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. Jonathan showed himself to be absolute evil, a predator who allowed his own mother's life to be taken without even trying to protect her. He started a romance with a minor, which exacerbated his guilt. Kaitlin, whom everyone initially considered a victim, became a criminal herself, cold-bloodedly killing an innocent woman. Police began an investigation, but 3 weeks had already passed since the death. While authorities were looking for the fugitives, the trash container with the woman's body had already been taken to a landfill. The searches were unsuccessful, and Nicole's remains were never found. The family of the deceased woman is now forced to experience emptiness and horror for the rest of their lives, knowing that the body of their loved one was never laid to rest. It is still rotting somewhere under a pile of trash. Jonathan and Kaitlin were in custody awaiting trial. The girl tried to defend herself by blaming everything on her adult boyfriend. But now, authorities saw her not as that innocent teenage girl thrown from one foster family to another, but as a young woman who turned emotional pain into a murder weapon and buried her future forever. They decided to try Coons as an adult, even though she was only 17 at the time of the crime. Even before the case reached trial, both Jonathan and Kaitlin pleaded guilty and were sentenced to life imprisonment. They both must spend at least 25 years behind bars before they have the opportunity to petition for parole. This is not a story about love. It is a story about power, manipulation, and a point of no return that was crossed by two people whose connection was a sentence from the very beginning. The story of Kaitlin Coons and Jonathan Jones is a grim reminder. Some wounds do not heal. They only fester until they poison everything around them. The only thing justice could do was send these unhealthy patients to a lifetime of quarantine. If you are finished watching, you're a real fan of true crime. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and give it a like. See you in the next video.